Young Turks now has audio, the TYT Audio Network, podcasts of some of your favorite shows and new shows, including one with Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator. She's going to do We the People with Nina Turner, talking about equality and justice and seeing that through the eyes of regular Americans who are affected by politics and policy. Everybody check it out at tyt.com/audio.
The Supreme Court has just made a ruling that is potentially disastrous when it comes to voting rights, not only in the state of Ohio, but states throughout the country. Now, this is all about Ohio purging its voter rolls. And the way that they did it is they allowed this purge to be triggered by individuals who don't vote for 2 elections in a row. And then they send a letter to that person's home, and if that person doesn't respond confirming his or her address, they will purge that person from the voter rolls. Now, there was a question about whether or not that was constitutional, and this case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, in a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court sided with the lawmakers in Ohio who want to do away with certain voting rights. The court's conservative majority ruled that Ohio did not violate federal rules by purging voters who failed to vote for 6 years and did not confirm their residency. Ohio has the strictest such law in the nation. Now, while it's true that they would be purged from the rolls after 6 years, the process would get triggered if they don't vote in 2 years. Okay, so that is what made this particular law in Ohio much stricter than other voter laws throughout the country. And now this ruling essentially sets a precedent that could be utilized by other Republican-led states. Now, why would it be used by other Republican-led states? Well, this law disproportionately impacts those who vote for Democrats. So it's usually the elderly, minorities, poor individuals, and also college students. This is what Justice Samuel Alito wrote in his majority ruling. A state violates the failure to vote clause only if it removes registrants for no reason other than their failure to vote. By contrast, Ohio waits 6 years before removal, following federal law to the letter. Okay, so his argument is, well, they send that letter to the address, and if they send that letter to the address and they don't respond, I guess that person probably doesn't live there anymore. So yeah, you could take them off, you could purge them from being registered voters. Now, Justice Stephen Breyer penned an 18-page dissent for the liberal wing of the court, focusing on the history of literacy tests, poll taxes, and other restrictions he said were designed to, quote, keep certain groups of citizens from voting. He also wrote, the streets of Ohio's cities are not filled with moving vans, nor has Cleveland become the nation's residential moving company's headquarters. Ohio's process erects needless hurdles to voting of the kind Congress sought to eliminate. So when you really think about it, yes, they might send that note or that letter asking people to confirm their address. What if it gets lost? What if that person is unable to read it because the wording could be sometimes complicated and difficult to understand? It takes time and resources to send confirmation back to the state to let them know that you still live at that address. It creates, in my opinion, for some, an undue burden, right? And so that is what the liberal justices were arguing, but it didn't matter because, again, it was a 5-4 ruling. Turns out Neil Gorsuch has a pretty big impact in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and it's like, listen, voting is your fundamental right, unless you're a felon, unless you have this specific ID, unless you do it often, unless you don't do it often, but respond to a mailer.
Yeah.
And, Black people haven't even had the right to vote for, regardless of what your president says, it has not been 100 years. Mm-hmm. But this is ridiculous. And so like some of this in this argument that it was Congress's judgment that a reasonable person with an interest in voting is not likely to ignore notice of this sort. I mean, I thought you just had to be a person and a citizen to be allowed, to the right to vote.
No. Yeah, and the law specifically says you're not
like,
supposed to be taken off the rolls for not having voted prior. It specifically says the law is designed to prevent this kind of thing, this purging of the voter rolls. But boy, what Anna said is what it's all about. If Obama and the Democrats had just held the feet to the fire of Congress and pressed for that Supreme Court appointment, they took that lying down. Merrick Garland, there was never even a vote. There was nothing, never even a hearing. It's disgusting. And that is why the Democratic Party has to stand up, and they got to play hardball the same way. And I say the Democrats, I'm talking about the left. I'm talking about the progressives. I understand the Democrats are mainstream, and you'll hear it a lot on the show, and they got way too mainstream and too comfortable. And as I say, they let that go. And that's how the Supreme Court ruling went sideways.
Yeah, that was a mess, and it wasn't just on the side of the people who were saying, no, the next president needs to fill this. The Supreme Court justice seat was vacant for a really long time.
Yeah, for over a year, exactly. And of course, there's obstruction by Republicans in Congress, but it's up to Democrats to fight tooth and nail, as you mentioned, Mark, to ensure that Obama's nominee gets his confirmation hearing, and that did not happen.
But Democrats need to do what the Republicans do. They've got a guy, Donald Trump, who's a fire-breathing dragon, and he would have been on Twitter every day calling them out, going, this is crap. My nominations, how come I can't get them through? These leaders, Democrats, 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 he would say. They didn't do any of that. They took it all too politely. The time for politeness is over. Yeah. But again, we've lost that battle for now. The Supreme Court is now hostage to right-wing conservative views, and this is one of the casualties.
That's exactly right.
But this is scary. Anything that goes against in any way the Voting Rights Act, that's scary. That's where it begins, and that's terrifying.
Absolutely agree.
Because this protects people who unfortunately weren't born with these rights.
Right.
Not too long ago.
And this has been going on for a while now. Republicans know that it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to win based on the merit of their positions, of their arguments. And so they want to game the system in their favor. They do it through redistricting, which they've gotten in trouble for. They do it through voter ID laws and all sorts of restrictive voting laws that make it increasingly difficult for individuals who tend to vote for Democrats to go out there and practice their right, which is to vote. Right. We're supposed to have a democratic system. Regardless of where you stand, in terms of your political affiliation, you should care about the democratic system. If Democrats were doing this in an effort to disenfranchise Republican voters, I would be disgusted by my own party, because I want people to be able to go out there and practice, their form of political activism, which is voting. By the way, the most powerful form is voting, and they're making it increasingly difficult for people to do that.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber, and second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.